How does the world change? Does it happen with a loud crash? In a crowded room where important people make big decisions? Sometimes. But sometimes, the world changes in the quietest moments. In a place no one is looking, with a person nobody knows. It can start with something so small, you might miss it if you blinked. This is a story about a moment like that. It didn't happen in a palace or a boardroom. It happened right here, in the cold, clear water of a California river. And it began not with a search for treasure, but with a simple need for wood. Before the gold, there was a man with a different kind of dream. His name was John Sutter. He wasn't an American, he was an immigrant from Switzerland with a complicated past, who came to California in 1839. And here, in what was then a remote part of Mexico, he saw his future. He got a huge land grant and started to build his own private kingdom. He called it New Helvetia, or New Switzerland. It was going to be a paradise of farms and ranches, the place of order, of agriculture. He built a fort, a massive adobe structure, to protect his new world. Sutter's dream was growing. He had farms, cattle, workers. But to build houses, fences, and shops, he needed lumber. Lots of it. Getting lumber from the coast was too slow and expensive. He needed his own supply. So he looked to the mountains, to the endless forests of pine and fir about 50 miles east of his fort. He found a perfect spot on the South Fork of the American River, a place the local Native Americans called Coloma, which means beautiful valley. Today, we call it Coloma. The land was perfect. The trees were perfect. The river was strong. All he needed was someone to build the sawmill. And that's where another man enters our story. His name was James Wilson Marshall. He wasn't a dreamer like Sutter. He was a quiet, sometimes moody man from New Jersey, a carpenter by trade. He had drifted west, looking for work and a place to settle. He was a good worker, reliable. Sutter hired him for lots of jobs, and he trusted him. So, in the summer of 1847, Sutter gave Marshall the task: go to Coloma, find the best spot, and build me a sawmill. It was just another job. A tough one for sure. They were out in the middle of nowhere. But for Marshall, it was just work. Marshall and his crew, a small group of local workers and veterans from the Mormon Battalion, set to work. They built cabins to live in and began the slow, hard process of building the mill. The biggest challenge was the tail race. This was a ditch, a channel dug to lead water away from the giant mill wheel after it had turned. Every day, they would dig out the dirt and gravel. And every night, they would divert the river's current into the ditch to wash away the loose debris. It was slow, back-breaking work. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. They were getting close. The mill was almost ready. January 24th, 1848. It started like any other day. A cold, clear winter morning. As he always did, Marshall walked down to the tail race to see how much rock and sand the water had cleared overnight. The mill was shut down, the water flowing gently through the newly dug channel. He was alone. The rest of the crew was getting breakfast. The world was quiet. It was just Marshall, the river, and the morning sun. He was looking at the depth of the channel, thinking about the work ahead. And then he saw it. A glint. Something shining in the shallow water, caught on the bedrock. It wasn't a rock. It was different. He reached down into the icy water and picked it up. It was small, about the size of a pea, and thin, but it was heavy for its size. His heart probably started to beat a little faster. He knew about the stories, the rumors of gold in these California hills. But rumors were one thing. This was something he could hold in his hand. He was a practical man. He needed to be sure. He placed the little flake on a flat stone and hammered it with another rock. If it was fool's gold, iron pyrite, it would shatter into dust. But it didn't shatter. It just flattened. It was soft, malleable, just like gold was supposed to be. He found a few more pieces. He tucked them into his pocket. At that moment, standing alone in that ditch, James Marshall was the only person on Earth who knew that the future had just changed. He walked back to camp. The world was still the same. The birds were singing. His men were getting ready for another day's work. But in his pocket, he held an earthquake. He showed the small flakes to his men. "Boys," he said, "I believe I have found a gold mine." At first, they were not so sure. They laughed it off. But Marshall was serious. They ran their own test. They bit it. They hammered it. Jenny Wimmer, the camp cook, supposedly dropped a piece into her pot of soap she was making, a strong lye solution. The next morning, it was still there, shining just as brightly. The skepticism turned to belief, to excitement. The secret was now shared among a handful of people in a remote valley. But the final word had to come from John Sutter. A few days later, Marshall rode the 50 miles to Sutter's fort. It was storming, a heavy winter rain. He rode hard. He arrived soaked to the bone, looking wild. He demanded to see Sutter, alone. He pulled a small pouch from his pocket and poured the contents onto a table. Sutter was intrigued, but also cautious. He needed proof. The two men locked themselves in a back room. Sutter brought out his encyclopedia, looking up the article for gold. They ran tests described in the book. They weighed the flakes against silver coins on a scale. They put them in nitric acid. The flakes passed every test. It was real. This was pure gold. But when the reality sank in, John Sutter didn't feel joy. He felt dread. He looked at Marshall and said, "This is the finest kind of gold." Then he asked him to keep it a secret. Sutter knew. He knew that a gold rush would destroy everything he had built. His workers would leave. His fields would be trampled. Strangers would pour in, squat on his land, and tear it apart looking for wealth. His agricultural dream would be washed away in a flood of gold seekers. He and Marshall tried to keep the secret. They made the workers at the mill promise to stay quiet for just 6 more weeks. But a secret this big is like holding water in your hands. It's bound to leak. A teamster from the mill went to a little store and paid for a bottle of brandy with a small pinch of the gold. The store owner was a man named Sam Brannan. Sam Brannan was no fool. He was a sharp businessman and a newspaper publisher. He quickly confirmed the stories, and then he started quietly buying up every pickaxe, shovel, and pan he could find. Once his store was stocked, he did something that lit the fuse on the California powder keg. On a spring day in 1848, he ran through the dusty streets of the tiny port town of San Francisco, waving a bottle full of gold dust over his head, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Gold! Gold! Gold from the American River!" And that's how it started. Not with a plan, but with an accident. John Sutter's fears came true. His empire crumbled. He died broke. James Marshall, the man who saw the first glint, never found his own fortune and also died in poverty. The quiet valley they found was changed forever. The first strike was just that, a single spark. But it was enough to start a fire that would reshape a nation and call the world to California.